So tell us about the Wuhan Tiandi project. It was awarded CTBUH's Urban Habitat Award in 2016.
Right.
What makes this development such a successful urban habitat, and how do you define that phrase?
Right. In fact, this morning I was looking at the dictionary trying to find out what urban habitat means. But I think my own interpretation is to talk about it like a community or a neighborhood. So I think what we have done at Wuhan, one of the most important things we have done is to ability to create a community, a special neighborhood that the people in Wuhan, the citizens of Wuhan really accept and they think is a very good one on the whole. So of course inside you have different functions. There's the commercial, the offices, the residential and so forth, but it's the building of the whole community that makes it special for the people that decide it's a good place to live, work, and play.
What are some of the specific elements that make that happen?
Yeah, first of all, it's the master planning. We have to plan it from the start to create a walkable, pedestrian-friendly, transit-based, mixed-use people and encourage people to mingle. So we have small blocks, relatively small blocks, and dense street network. Some of them we actually built and maintain ourselves but open to the public. And then we have sustainability. The whole community is very sustainable. We achieve our LEED ND Gold certification as well as the individual building level certification. And the public spaces we create, which are the streets, the plazas, and the parks that links the individual developments together. We think that makes it special. And of course, we have the individual development that actually have to be good and successful on their own to tie everything together.
With a new project like Wuhan Tiandi, how do you impart some sense of identity and maybe even a sense of place and history to a new development?
Right. Well, Wuhan Tiandi is an urban regeneration project. It has, the site has its own history. First of all, Wuhan also have a sense of history because it was actually already a very big city even 100 years ago, with a lot of Westerners coming in to do business and so forth. So, and in the site actually is also historic buildings as well as very old trees, and so we try to keep those within the master plan. And in fact, we actually, in order to keep the old trees, we actually change our plan a bit to save the trees. And also then in the planning of new development, we try to relate back to the context. For example, we have the urban design guideline that specifies certain colors, certain materials for all of our residential, for example. So they have some coherency and relate back to the context as a whole. Of course, then we have some diversity on the office buildings, and also in our low-rise, open-air restaurant and retail section of the Wuhan Tiandi, we actually incorporate the historic buildings and the trees into the plan and make it very walkable, so people feel they are still feeling what they have felt for some part of the site, that they have some identity to it. And plus the new one also hopefully reflect what they have remembered a little bit before.
What were some of the historic buildings? What was the site before you got to it?
Yeah, it was a mixture of some old residential neighborhood and some factories and so forth, a mishmash of everything. But there are several historic buildings actually was built by the Japanese, but in the fashion of European buildings. So it's quite actually special. So we decided to keep some of those and then convert them into restaurants and cafes, and then preserve the facade as much as we can, and then with the preservation of the old trees and vegetation. And then the new one, we try to also be sympathetic in the language that we develop, so that make sure that everything is quite coherent.
Right, and that included some courtyard housing blocks, right? Historic courtyard.
Yeah, the courtyard really is a kind of innovation for China, because China has a very strong sunlight requirement, but in Wuhan they can relax it a little bit. So we think of the courtyard building as being a kind of stimulus to create that neighborhood, because then we have street walls from all four sides. So that certainly is a kind of challenge. So I think in the end, we have been able to create or stimulate to create this community a little bit quicker with the courtyard type buildings, and then the residents and the market seems to accept it as a good place to live.
Yeah, I wonder about the market, because it's obvious the way you're describing it, some of the benefits of historic preservation here. But was there ever pressure at any point to just wipe the site clear and develop it as densely as possible?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as a developer, we do maximize our asset FAR and GFA, so we're not losing any floor area, first of all. So we are not, it's not a give and take thing. We definitely have a responsibility to do that. Within that context, there are different ways to do that.
Yeah.
So the several historic buildings we talk about are actually encouraged by the city that we adapt and reuse. So that's what we do, and we are happy to do that, because we would like to create a community that have some relationship to historic buildings. But other than that, the small lots and the streets and all that, in some way, when we begin the project, not too many people really understand what it means. I think today people do understand that actually it's all part of the skill set and the stimulus to create this community as a whole.
What changed then that made people realize?
Well, I think it's not a one-day thing, but Chinese, I think has a culture together. And they love to have great open spaces. So once you create these great plazas and beautiful parks and nicely scaled streets for them, they use it very well. They love these kind of environments. So I think today it's not so much to try to change the mentality of the people, but it's more about changing the process of development, maybe a little bit about even the planners and the designers to do some of the things that we have done here. And of course, sometimes the government needs some encouragement as well.
Yeah, it seems like the relationship there is the key. You may have a developer or an architect who has a vision, but the planner doesn't agree, or maybe the planner has a vision, but the developer doesn't want to follow it. So what lessons do you think Shui on Land has for how to work with those relationships so that other cities in China can follow the lead of Wuhan Tiandi?
Yeah, from our own experience, there are several key things. First is that it has to be planned. And it has to be planned in a way that we know can encourage interaction by walking and by mingling. So there's certain scale about the blocks and the streets and how we make the streets. That is a kind of skill set that actually can be learned and can be copied somewhere else, and that has to be followed. So it has to be from the ground, from the day one when we did the concept master plan, and then everything else is a step. You have to approve it like that is, and then you have to find the right designers and planners and the early landscape architects to do each of them to provide the kind of beauty that to make it happen. So it's a complicated process, but it can be learned, and it can be copied. The process can be copied, but of course the looks will be different because every time the context is different and the blocks and streets are different, but the process itself certainly can be learned.